Hello, everyone. My name is Laura D. Gibson. I am the curator of the Finding Home Stories of Displacement exhibition, currently on display at Detroit Artist Market, running until May 21st. Finding Home Stories of Displacement reflects on stories of home, displacement, and memory while exploring narratives of specific marginalized communities in America through the eyes of local Detroit artists. Finding Home showcases work that advocates against displacement while shedding light on its historical consequences. This reflection is especially necessary during the COVID-19 crisis. Currently with me today, I have Bryce Detroit, who is an Afrofuturist artist, griot, advocate, and pioneer of entertainment justice. As a cultural designer, he is a national award-winning music producer, performer, and curator. Through his practice, Bryce Detroit demonstrates the power of using music, entertainment, arts, and native legacies to design cultural infrastructure for preserving, producing, and promoting new diasporic African narratives, cultural literacies, and cooperative neighborhood-based economies. Bryce Detroit is a 2019 New Museum Ideas Cities Fellow and a 2017 Knights Arts Challenge Award winner. Bryce Detroit was also selected as a music curator for the 10th St. Etienne International Design Biennial, presenting Detroit as a UNESCO City of Design, curating and producing all of the live music programming for the event's opening 2 weeks and becoming the first person to curate live music programming in the biennial's 20-year history. So with that, I would like to introduce again Bryce Detroit. It's so wonderful having you with me today. And I'll give you the floor to get a little bit more in depth about your current work and current practice and about the piece in the current show.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here in conversation with you, Laura. Super shout out to you for your curation of, to me, by far one of the most relevant and impactful shows that's happened at that space. So super shout out to that. So yes, I am Bryce Detroit. My practice is entertainment justice. So in relation to, what does that mean in relation to this particular work as a part of the Finding Home exhibition? For me, the sentiment, like the way that we even came to the sentiment of road work and hood close to gentrifier was very much me as an MC, you know what I mean? Like straight rapper style. It was me at home one day, really fed up with a particular type of unaccountability and disrespectful dynamic that have been demonstrated by far too many outside entities that end up collaborating in our neighborhoods, whether we invite them in or whether they are brought in by philanthropy and manufactured collaborations. But in my particular time, this was like 2018, was very much in a divorce of a collaboration with folks from the outside who had outside interests. And there was this particular thing that they kept saying to me, Bryce, it's hard to respect your culture, the culture of the people in the North End, because it's not written down. And that's a period. Like for me to have heard that sentiment more than a dozen times, like it's so hard to understand how to behave. It's so hard to know if we're doing, because it's not written down. Like the continuing to say that, one thing that I highlighted was one, there is a failure to actively listen to what Bryce is saying and to what many others of us are saying. We are communicating our cultural code, norms, ethos, politics. We're communicating these things orally, as well as we are demonstrating them through body language. So we're communicating verbally, as well as through our body language and the way that we engage each other and the way that we engage our space, our built environment. So one, there's a failure on a cultural competence. There's a lack of cultural competency. That's one. But on another, there is this, okay, you from your Western civilized mind linear thinking. You are continuing to tell me that whether authentic or, you know what I mean, manipulative or whatever that you're being, but regardless, this sentiment of it's challenging for my European mind, which dissects by nature, which does not deal in integration, which does not deal with many parts making up a whole. You're telling me that your mind is challenged with understanding our cultural code and politics because it's not written down. Let me write some shit down for you. How about this? You know what I mean? And then that's where the shit first came from, like a lyric. It was like, nigga, hood clothes and gentrifiers. Like, boom. And it was me already in this internal conversation, like, Bryce, what's the way to make this cultural code visible? Period. Because you need to make it visible. And this is something that has to be, this is beyond website. This is beyond a Google document, you know what I'm saying, that's passed around amongst the collaborators. No. This is an actual cultural politic that you need to be in very plain sight. My own, period. So my own love for the sign making culture in Detroit, painted signs, as well as traffic control signs. Like, Bryce is just a huge fan of signs just my whole life. So that as a culture, a part of our visual language in Detroit, and it was just like, wow, signs. Okay, signs. We were thinking about, like, at first, hand painted signs. That's where my first reference for signs comes from as a child. It's like my love for painted signs on buildings. And as well as the liquor store signs. In terms of typography, huge fan. I mean, just because it's a part of our built environment, you know what I mean, all my life. So the hand painted commercial signs, liquor store signs, as well as the hand painted big building joints. So it was me like, okay, cool. Yet this is not an advertisement. And that could be misinterpreted by outsiders, like, oh, and it's like, and now it's just like, you're missing the fucking point. So it's like, road signs. Because it's always construction season in Michigan, you know what I mean, in Detroit.
Right.
It was, road signs all around me, all the time. And it was just in this particular day that we were going through, like, okay, nope, I'm not gonna have it misinterpreted as an advertisement. Road signs. Road signs. Yes. And then that's when it was like, bro, because we had just seen, like, in the last maybe whatever hours from, you know what I mean, within having this internal conversation, we had just saw some road closed signs. And we had just had a conversation about, like, man, we really do love construction season. We love the aesthetic of these signs. We always have. We love the material. And we just had this whole thing. You know what I mean? So, like, a couple hours later, to be in this internal combo, like, road signs. So, and then, like, seconds later, on some rapper shit, the lyric came. You know what I mean? Hood closed to gentrifiers. It's like, we out here. So yeah, that was me just wanting to articulate, like, how a musician, a music-based artist, songwriter, producer would end up producing this visual art, this structural art piece. Yes, and it's me coming from my hip hop MC thinking. You know what I mean? Like, we got to make this language very clear. It's got to be sexy. It needs to be lyrical. It's going to be lyrical, and it's going to be poignant and very, like, undeniable. Nobody from the outside will be able to say, I don't understand, period. That was a big thing. Like, everybody's going to get this. Even if it takes more conversation, at first blush, you're going to get something. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you made a very good point on how you were like, it's not an advertisement, because this could be misconstrued in thought of something as an opinion. But with street signs, you have to stop, you look and you listen, right? And you have to say, oh, this is an actual enforcement. This is like a policy being like enforced upon me. And then you have to reflect upon it yourself, and you're just like, yo, then what am I? Who am I? Do I belong? Do I exist in this space? You know, so that's such a good point. And you had mentioned where it came from, you being a lyricist. You know, it was very important that you make it straight into the point. But you of course said, you know, I had to make it very, very enforcing and to the public what we're trying to say. So can you go a little bit deeper in this like fluidness between like inclusion and exclusion, like, because you want to have the conversation between people who exist in the neighborhoods, but you also want to have it with people who live outside of it, or maybe don't even realize what it means to really be a part of community and what you want to say in these street signs.
Yes, so there are two main aspects to excuse me, to this Hood Clothes to Gentrifiers campaign. On the inclusion piece, which is where it starts from, this is, as much as it is a personal politic of mine, this is also a collective politic. This is a collectively shared, held cultural principle, sentiment. It just so happens that me as one of us, you know what I mean? Like, let me bring forth some accessible language. So this, on that tip, is a mechanism. It's a language-based mechanism for all of us who are confronted by gentrification, all of us who have real feedback, like in our body, about how things are happening in our neighborhood actually make us feel, yet we may not have the time and space to really process and come up with the language for, oh, this is exactly the way, oh, this is my feeling, this is my articulation of it. Not everybody has that time and space. So this, for me, is a way of looking at inclusion in terms of accessible language that allows all of us to be in this conversation, that need to be in this conversation. I'm talking about those of us who are 100% confronted by it and are really clear because we're on the front lines of it. Also, those of us who feel that we are outside of the impact of gentrification, as well as those of us who think gentrification is some cool shit that just simply means making a neighborhood look better. All of us need to be in this conversation. And with this language, this tool, and it's like, boom, now we have a way to be in the space together, to have a container, be in the same container, and really elevate the conversation in the ways it needs to be, for real. Yes. So that's inclusion on that tip. Can jump into exclusion for sure, but want to hear if you got something to say.
No, I would love to hear your point on that. Again, it just makes you wonder who you are, like what stake you have in a space, what stake you have in a community, whether you just got there and you may have done a lot of progressive things in that community versus an elder who's been there for 20 plus years, maybe 30 years, who's just like, what's going on here? You know, it's just that kind of like weird boundary of like, who belongs, how am I impacting it, but is it also kind of like making me be an outsider if I don't talk to people, if I don't, engage with my next door neighbor? What does that kind of like mean in terms of like being exclusive because you kind of hibernate, or you just get here but you just changing up everything, Boom.
So appreciate what you just said, because I'm gonna take that and go here. Exclusion in terms of how individuals who move into neighborhoods in a disconnected way end up excluding themselves from the cultural fabric of the place that they're entering. So this Hood Clothes to Gentrifiers campaign for sure has been a mechanism for some people some white body people who told me, like, yeah, I'm definitely looking at how I entered this neighborhood or this community more critically, especially with the aware, because that's part of my conversation when we're talking about exclusion. So those people who enter a space create boundaries, architectural boundaries, design their homes and their landscapes in ways that compartmentalize and ward themselves off from the rest of the neighborhood. And then how in a city, not a city, in an administration that prioritizes a particular racially centered socioeconomic population, then when these people who exclude themselves on purpose architecturally, and then by not engaging with the people like Marsha, music, Ashe to the mama, how she says, just say hi, people who don't just say hi, exclude themselves culturally, socially, as well as architecturally. And then they, through their socio-political power, can inform policy that brings resources to a neighborhood, in particular programs that exclude the majority of the residents from these particular resources, and then also can inform public safety policies that end up excluding people who are indigenous to the neighborhood, excluding them from being able to access their cultural spaces in the same way that they used to. So now we're being excluded from engaging, we're being excluded from creating our own reality in our own neighborhoods. So it's like, yeah, because of that feeling of exclusion, being excluded from resources, being excluded from development conversations, being excluded from being able to inform the actual design of our city. Well, as a response, for sure in the North End, for sure through my work and my collaborators, we have created our own resource networks. We've created our own development strategies. We've created our own funding mechanisms. And in that, and the work, the real work that we've been doing to develop people, place, and keep culture, then now we can exclude outside interests that before would be able to come into the neighborhood seemingly willy-nilly and shit, you know what I mean? Because there were no, well, seemingly no self-deputized diplomats and ambassadors of the neighborhood. Yet for me, this is an act of diplomacy. So you now have those of us who are deputized, like, yes, Bryce Detroit, I am a diplomat, you know what I mean? And I am an ambassador. Not only does Bryce go out here and promote the culture and the people in the place and what our code and ethics are, but we also, once folks are vetted, we give out licenses, you know what I'm saying, to enter the neighborhood under particular protocols and such. At the same time, though, you just can't come into the neighborhood and get down conventional business as usual, acting like it's a new frontier or it's a blank slate. So that's one way that this campaign is also dealing with exclusion, because we're communicating that there is a particular type of doing shit that is no longer tolerated here. So there's exclusion. Yes, it's exclusive. It's a club, you know what I mean? It's an initiation. It's a whatever you want to call it. But yes, there are, it is no longer just come on in and do what you want. You know what I mean? There's a group of us and that's growing in numbers in the North End and Brightmoor, on the East Side, you know what I'm saying? All over the city. Bagley, Fitzgerald, like, we're growing in collective consciousness, and that we're including each other in our own, you know what I mean, idea of community. And in that, we are allowed to exclude anything that undermines or defies the political spiritual and cultural integrity of what we're doing.
Yes, absolutely. Because all of this is the idea of structuring home. If I feel like I'm being pushed out, if I feel like I have to leave, if I feel like I am not welcomed, how am I supposed to know where I can find home at? I have made home here, and now you're alleviating that from me. So obviously, but it shouldn't feel, you shouldn't feel threatened. Of course, like you mentioned, there are rules, there are enunciations, but then open arms. But it's always a threat to that fabric constantly. And like you said, the conversation needs to be, home is here, but you can't just come in and restructure it the way you think our home should look like. Yes. But I kind of also want to pick your brain a little bit more about how music comes into the play, because with we're working your practice, you see sound and energy as ways of healing for the community. So with that, where does music come into play to unify and to heal community?
So for me, and this is me coming from as a walking ancestor, you know what I mean? And sound frequency as a fundamental building material of the manifest universe, then it is sound structure that, for me, equals manifest reality. A body that is on a frequency level, a body that's in homeostasis, you know what I mean? Like it's in balance, then that body and each organ is actually resonating at particular frequencies. Such to the point, you can put sound equipment on a body and be sonographs. You know what I mean? You can put a sound instrument up to a belly and see the position of the baby, the whole fetus, and the same way you can send sound waves through the body and detect the frequency of vibration of our organs to see if an organ is off or on. So it's acknowledging that how our sound is structured is a material expression of our health, of our state of being. So me having existed in the body my whole life so far, you know what I'm saying? This life, we've been in this body so far. So thus far, I'm very aware that at different times, the sound that was the dominant sound in my imagination, at times it has been the sound of outside settler colonial contextualizings of my own person, of my own being. That being the dominant sound that was structuring my self-image. It was structuring the way that Bryce imagined himself engaging in the environment and engaging with people. And by effect, my body, there were different times in my adolescence and in middle school and elementary school where my body was more erect based on where Bryce was at that particular time. But then, because there were times where for sure, like as a child, you're way more focused on what's going on in your own. Like it's just me, my imagination, my desires, my blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah. But then there are also times during childhood where it could be because of TV or because of whatever the external environment, whatever the external media that we are being exposed to. There are times during childhood that those become the dominant conversations at particular moments. And we're questioning ourselves and we're beginning to inform how we will see ourselves. And it's just in those moments though. It's those moments that where a particular type of trauma occurs. It's the trauma of reinforcing a victim identity. And even if you don't know you're doing it because you're just choosing to accept, consciously or subconsciously, the dominant narrative that you're bombarded with. So it's like, okay, this must be a truth,
Right.
because we keep hearing it. So but that's a traumatic experience though, because what we don't know at those ages is that everything inside of us is like, no, it's resistance that's happening. The reason why even like okay, that's resistance. Something on the inside is trying to block that shit from coming in. But it's just the accumulation of these moments, and they're sound-based for me. These are sounds. It's a structured sound. It's the sound of police cars, the sound of gunshots that are allowed in certain places. You know what I mean? The sound of poverty has a sound. It sounds like empty streets that used to be commercial and residential thoroughfares and arteries, and it's vibrant. Healthy neighborhoods, healthy economies has a sound. So for me, just going, like, having said all that, because Bryce is a producer and we are a songwriter, and these things are in my DNA as a Detroiter, then there's as like the way that my engineer and my architect is set up, then the priority in terms of developing land and space is making sure that we have spaces for designing the sounds that will structure our spirits and our bodies for the sustainable futures that we're all striving towards. So that looks like the garage, which is a space to be able to create and experiment with making new sounds, and in particular, new sounds, new songs that are coming from integrated, loving, healed points of ancestral identity. And I'm saying ancestral only as a distinguisher from settler colonial points of identity. The majority of even Black, and Bryce got a whole ass conversation about Black, shout out Ricky Weaver, but even the way that most people contextualize Black is the contextualizing of the settler colonizer. If your Black starts with Africa, if your Black starts with slavery, then that means that your Black comes from the settler colonizer, period. And that's a whole nother conversation. But for me, that's what Bryce is saying when we're saying ancestral points of identity. We're talking about the myriad points of self and cultural identity that have existed for eons before this most recent grain of salt on the Earth's timeline. You know what I mean? So that's what we're referring to by ancestral. But that's the point, though, is making spaces for creation of the sounds and the sonics that will inspire new points of identity. Into something that you can give to the people. You know what I mean? Okay, so having spaces where we can take the creations and these new experiments and be able to refine them and produce them to be able to give to the people either in a recorded medium, you know what I mean, or in live performance. So that's the apex bar. And then having a space that's dedicated to cultivating the workforce, the songwriters, the composers, the producers, the technical artists that will make the new records, make the new hits, the same way that Motown did. In Motown's existence and their legacy, what it showed me is Detroit has a legacy and a responsibility of creating music that shifts world culture. Motown created the culture through music for the late 20th century, period. So Bryce looks at that as his responsibility through Detroit reporting. It's like, oh, okay, this is me just continuing that. The 21st century needs new pop culture. And for me, understanding as a record producer that it's through our pop culture, in particular our music, well, in a very real way, our music, where where we get the first information on how we want to see ourselves, how we may want to interact with others, be it for better or for worse. So through music, entertainment for me, then having spaces where we can create the new pop culture and do what Detroit does, which is give the world the medicine through music. You know what I mean? Period. So.
Oh man, that's why I'm really excited about this Friday's performance. Bryce Detroit will be performing this Friday from 6 to 9 at Detroit Artists Market, entitled Traffic Control Space Activation. So we'll be hearing a little bit more about his work, the current piece in the show, and how music, again, is the call for engagement for community healing. And of course, redesigning the new Detroit in the eyes of what Detroiters should see it. So Bryce, is there a way for people to get in contact with you for maybe, learning some more about your work, things that are on the way, possible collaborations? How do we get in touch with you?
So the easiest way to get in touch is through the socials. So the IG for sure, Bryce Detroit, Facebook, Bryce Detroit, my website, brycedetroit.com. And also for sure, come out this Friday, 6 to 9, Detroit Artists Market. And just look forward to a lot more. We just look forward to a program schedule coming out soon, and the intention, making moments for us to have more critical conversations, as well as these moments to necessarily question and celebrate all that we think and know we are. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. So again, thank you so much, Bryce, for joining me this afternoon.
Yes.
Home Stories of Displacement is on display again until May 21st. To learn more about Bryce and the other artists in the show, visit www.detroitartistmarket.org. All right, thank you, everyone. Bye.